Fellow Mountaineers, you made it to another edition of the Trust the Beard podcast. I am your host, The Beard, and today is week 3 of the 4 weeks of fire. And the scalding hot take today is that Rich Rodriguez, head coach of West Virginia, will win the Big 12 Coach of the Year award. So let's break this down right now. When fans talk about Rich Rodriguez, most of the conversation usually centers around the offense, right? The spread, the tempo, running quarterback, the rushing numbers, how his system changed college football. But there's another part of Rich Rod's resume that I don't think gets enough attention. And it's the fact that he has won Conference Coach of the Year 6 different times. And while that number itself is pretty impressive, you also have to look at where he did it, when he did it, and honestly, the records that he had when he accomplished these awards. Because Rich Rodriguez has won these Coach of the Year awards in 4 different conferences across 4 different decades, right? So you had the West Virginia IAC, the Big East, the Pac-12, Conference USA, and this spans from the 90s to the 2000s to the 10s and the 2020s, right? Think about how ridiculous that longevity is, right? College football has completely reinvented itself multiple times since Rich Rod won his first award, and yet somehow more than 30 years later, he's still winning the exact same kind of award. And when you break these seasons down, I think you start seeing a pattern that could be very, very important for West Virginia this season. So let's go all the way back to 1993, right? Glenville State. Rodriguez goes 10-3, overall 6-1 conference play. Glenville wins the conference championship. They advance to the NAIA national title game, and that's where he receives both Conference Coach of the Year and National Coach of the Year. And this wasn't just a good season for Glenville State, right? This is a season where you could really start to see what Rich Rod could do as a program builder, right? Glenville had gone 1-7-1 in 1990, his first season there. 3 years later, they're 10-3 playing for a national championship. And you got to remember, Glenville wasn't simply just winning games. His offense was becoming extremely dominant, right? They note that the Pioneers led the nation in both total offense and scoring in 93 and 94, right? That's Coach of the Year material. But then something interesting happens the very next season. So we'll look at 94. Rich Rod wins it again. But Glenville doesn't win 10 games. They don't go undefeated. They don't even improve their overall record. They actually go 8-3. And that's important because that's a number I want you to remember. 8 wins. All right, Glenville goes 8-3 overall, 5-1 conference play, finishes tied for first in the conference, and they reach the NAIA playoffs. Again, Rodriguez is named Coach of the Year for the second consecutive season. So already we have our first example of something we're going to talk a lot more about in the next segment. Coach of the Year doesn't necessarily mean coach with the prettiest overall record, right? It doesn't necessarily require 10-11 wins. Something it's about is what you've accomplished relative to your expectations. You know, sometimes it is about winning your conference and dominating everybody, maximizing your roster, but sometimes it's about the transformation of a program. And keep that in mind because we're going to see it again. So now you go to 2003. This is his first stint at West Virginia. And that 2003 season might be the most interesting on this entire graphic because of what we're talking about today. Because West Virginia finishes 8-5, not 11-1, not 10-2, not even 9 wins, 8-5. And Rich Rodriguez wins Big East Coach of the Year. Why is that? Because of context. Remember where this program had been, right? His first season in 2001, they went 3-8. And then by 2002, we exploded, went 9-4. And then in 2003, despite finishing only 8-5, the Mountaineers went 6-1 in Big East play and tied for the conference championship. And that's the distinction I want to make. Overall record 8-5, conference record 6-1, and he wins Coach of the Year. That should immediately get the attention of anybody trying to figure out what Rich Rod would have to accomplish at WVU to enter the Big 12 of the Year conversation. Or I'm sorry, Big 12 Coach of the Year conversation. Because historically, even Rich Rodriguez himself hasn't needed a double-digit win season to win this award. So now we get to 05, right? 11-1, perfect 7 record in the Big East. We finished number 5 in the AP poll. We beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. He gets his second Big Coach of the Year award. Now, this is what we would normally picture when somebody says coach of the year, right? Again, 11 wins, conference title, major bowl. That represents just one coach of the year award because his other winning seasons show us that the standard isn't always 11 wins. Now we look at 2014, jump ahead another decade, different part of the country, different conference, completely different era of college football. Rodriguez is at Arizona. They go 10-4, 7-2 in Pac-12 play. They win their division. He's named Pac-12 Coach of the Year. Now look at his resume again. Coach of the Year in the WVIAC, Big East, and now the Pac-12. 3 different conferences, 3 different decades, different recruiting footprints, different competition, different programs, same coach. Now that matters to me because it demonstrates that this wasn't just Rich Rod finding one perfect situation at the other schools. He has repeatedly built teams that exceeded expectations in completely different environments. And then we get to 2024 at Jacksonville State. And this is one that really catches my attention, right? Rich Rod's now in his 60s. College football has changed beyond recognition from when he first started at Glenville, right? We got the portal, the NIL, conference realignment, roster turnover. It's a different sport in so many ways. What does he do? He wins Coach of the Year again. Jacksonville State goes 9-4, 7-1 in Conference USA. So now we put the whole picture together, right? 6 awards, 4 conferences, 4 different decades. And here's the number I want to emphasize. Of those 6 Coach of the Year seasons, 3 came without reaching double-digit wins, right? 94, 03, 24. He went 8-3, 8-5, 9-4. That's half those awards, right? He got 8 or 9 wins. And that completely changes the way I look at the possibility of Rich Rod winning Big 12 Coach of the Year at West Virginia, because I've said it before that I think 8 or 9 wins is absolutely within the range of possibility for this WVU team. And someone might hear 8 wins and say, well, that's not Coach of the Year material. Really? Because Coach Rodriguez has already won the award with 8 wins twice, right? He's won it with 9, he's won it with 10, he's won it with 11, right? There isn't one magic number. And that brings me to the bigger question. If Rich Rod takes this West Virginia team and wins 8 or 9 games, does he actually have a chance? Because if we're assuming that the Big 12 Coach of the Year automatically has to be coach of the conference champion or automatically has to be coach with the best overall record, we might be making the wrong assumption. Rich Rodriguez's own career gives us evidence of that. But I want to go deeper. I wanted to see how the Big 12 itself actually votes. Does this conference simply hand Coach of the Year to whoever finishes first? Or reward something else? Does it reward improvement? Does it reward exceeding expectations? Because if that's what the Big 12 Coach of the Year values, then Rodriguez could be sitting in exactly the kind of situation where he wins this award. And that's where we're going next, because I want to go back through the Big 12 Coach of the Year winners, looked at their records, where they finished, and I looked at whether they had the best record in the conference. And what I found makes this Rich Rod conversation a whole lot more interesting, because in the Big 12, you don't necessarily have to be number 1 to be the Coach of the Year. What if I told you that Rich Rod could win Big 12 Coach of the Year in 2026 without West Virginia winning 10 games? Not 11, not 12, maybe not even 9. Because when you look at the history of this award, there's one coach who completely changed the conversation. That was Matt Campbell at Iowa State. Campbell won or shared Big 12 Coach of the Year 3 times. And in those 3 seasons, his final records were 8-5, 8-5, 9-3. Right? Average of only 8.3 wins per season. Now compare that to the larger history that we're going to look at. Right? Over a 20-year sample, the average Big 12 Coach of the Year winner has roughly 11 wins, 2.4 losses, and an 81.6 winning percentage. Matt Campbell didn't come close to that average win total, and yet the Big 12 coaches voted for him 3 different times. Why? Because Coach of the Year isn't always an award for the coach with the best team. Sometimes it's an award for the coach who did the best job. And there's a massive difference between these 2 things. And that's why I think Matt Campbell's history at Iowa State could tell us a lot about Rich Rod's path to this award in 2026, especially when the betting market has put West Virginia's win total around 5.5 wins. So first look at the names on this graphic, right? Bob Stoops won this award 4 times. Mike Gundy won it 3, Bill Snyder twice. And then you have a list of single-digit guys. Extremely successful coaches. And generally speaking, their records look exactly like what you would expect, right? 11 wins, 12 wins, 13. That's why the average comes out to roughly 11 for all these coaches in an 81.6 win percentage. That's the profile of an elite football team. So if that were the entire story, we'd probably say Rich Rod needs 10 or 11 wins, maybe needs to make the Big 12 championship game, maybe even needs to win the conference. But then we get to Matt Campbell, and Campbell completely blows that theory apart. So let's start in 2017. This is Campbell's second season at Iowa State, and I understand what Iowa State was at this point, right? It's not a program expected to compete for the Big 12 championship. The Cyclones were picked to finish 9th in the preseason polls, and they were coming off a 3-9 season. So expectations were pretty low. Well, Iowa State finishes the regular season 7-5, 5-4 in conference play, and they eventually won the Liberty Bowl at 8-5. But the record is not going to tell you why Campbell won Coach of the Year. The story does, right? Iowa State went into Norman, beat number 3 Oklahoma 38-31. Right, this is their first victory over the Sooners since 1990, and it was also the school's first road victory over a top 5 opponent. Then 3 weeks later, they did it again. Iowa State beat number 4 TCU 14-7. Before that season, Iowa State had basically no history of beating top 5 teams. So the Cyclones appeared in the AP Top 25 for the first time in almost 20 years. And the team that picked 9th finished tied for 4th in the Big 12 with 2 major upsets. That's Coach of the Year material. Not because of 7 regular season wins is some incredible number. It was because Campbell completely changed what people thought Iowa State was capable of. So now here's where Campbell's case gets even more interesting, because doing it once is one thing, but doing it again the very next year, that's different. So in 18, Iowa State was picked to finish 7th in the preseason poll, so expectations had increased some, but they weren't expected to be atop of the conference, right? And they had a slow start at 1-3, and instead of collapsing, they win 7 of its next 8 games. They finished the season 8-4, 6-3 Big 12 play. That was the school record for conference victories, and Iowa State tied for 3rd in the Big 12, their highest conference finish in 40 years. That's why Campbell shared Big 12 Coach of the Year with Lincoln Riley. Right? Oklahoma won the Big 12, went to the college football playoff, had the Heisman Trophy winner in Kyler Murray, and the Big 12 coaches still looked at what Campbell had accomplished and said, that deserves Coach of the Year recognition. That's incredibly important here, because it tells you this award isn't asking who has the best football team. Instead, it's asking who did the best coaching job. And that's how an 8-win coach can stand beside a college football playoff coach and share Coach of the Year award. Now we get to 2020. Campbell takes the next step. This isn't simply an underdog pulling off a couple upsets anymore, right? Iowa State now has become a legit Big 12 contender. They go 8-1 in Big 12 play, right? That's a school record, 8 wins. And Iowa State finishes alone atop the Big 12 regular season for the first time in school history. They make their first ever Big 12 championship game. They get all the way to number 6 in the playoff rankings, right? The highest ranking in the school at the time. They beat Oklahoma, they beat Texas, and Campbell becomes the first Iowa State coach to beat both of those teams in the same season. He wins Big 12 Coach of the Year for the 3rd time in 5 seasons. And here's what's incredible. His final record was 9-3. Right, there's a common denominator amongst these seasons. It's not wins, it's overachievement. It's taking the expectations people had for the program and destroying them. Right? Campbell didn't need Iowa State to become Oklahoma. He needed Iowa State to become something people didn't think Iowa State could become. And I think that's incredibly important for West Virginia in 2026. Now, let's bring this home, right? Let's take this back to WVU, because West Virginia doesn't enter 2026 with the expectations of Texas Tech or BYU, right? We're not talking about a team everyone expects to win 10, 11 games. Again, the betting market has our win total at 5.5. And that's the number I want you to remember because coach of the year isn't evaluated in a vacuum. Expectations matter. If a team is expected to win 10 games and wins 10 games, that's a good season. But they did what everyone thought they would do. If a team is expected to win 5 games or 6 games and wins 9 or 10, that's different. That's a 3.5 win swing over the market expectation. And that's where Rich Rod could become incredibly dangerous in a coach of the year race. So let's start conservatively. Suppose West Virginia goes 8-4. Would that automatically make Rich Rod coach of the year? No, because context still matters. But we're talking about a program with a preseason win total of about 5.5, suddenly winning 8 or 9 games. Now let's add some more context. What if West Virginia also finishes with a winning Big 12 record? What if they knock off one or two of the conference favorites? Right? We do have Texas Tech. We have Houston. We don't have BYU this year, but we have Arizona. What if they're in the Big 12 championship race entering November? What if Rich Rod takes a team nobody expected to matter in the conference race and has them playing meaningful football late in the season? And here's the part I think people might misunderstand, right? The most important number isn't actually 5.5. It's the number West Virginia finishes relative to 5.5, right? That's the opportunity, right? If West Virginia wins 6 games, Vegas basically nailed it, right? 7, that's a good season. 8, now you're starting to talk about exceeding the expectations. 9 and 10, now you're really getting to the conversation of having a complete turnaround and blowing the doors off what people thought would happen. History says if Rich Rod can turn that into 8 or 9, we may have a Big 12 Coach of the Year race on our hands. Now we know what the Big 12 has historically rewarded. Again, not always the best team. So who enters 2026 with the best opportunity to win this thing? That's what we're going to look at next. The odds for each coach. All the Big 12 fans want to know who's going to win the conference. Texas Tech, BYU, Houston, Arizona. Is it a dark horse? But I'm going to ask a different question. Who has the best chance to win Big 12 Coach of the Year? And after digging through some preseason projections and averaging out where they believe every Big 12 team will finish, I think there's a very specific part of this conference where the Coach of the Year winner could come from. And honestly, West Virginia is sitting right in the middle of it. 11th. That is a number I want you to remember because if Rich Rod takes a team everyone expects to finish around 11 and suddenly has them sitting at 5th or 4th, that's a Coach of the Year story. And history tells us that that story can matter every bit as much as having the best team. So let's start at the top, right? The consensus, most people, is that Texas Tech and BYU are, 1 or 2 or 1A and 1B, however you want to do it. Then there's Utah, Houston, Arizona. Then you start looking at Kansas State, TCU, Arizona, Oklahoma State on down the list. And then again, we get West Virginia at 11. The Big 12 doesn't even conduct an official preseason football poll anymore. But independent media projections are telling basically the same story. West Virginia is expected to finish near or around the bottom of the conference. So whether you say 10th, 11th, 13th, whatever the vote may be, nobody is putting West Virginia near the top. And for Coach of the Year purposes, that might actually be an advantage for Rich Rodriguez. So now, somebody is probably looking at this graphic saying, as you can see on the right there, I have my Coach of the Year watch list. We'll zoom on it right here. Well, wait a minute. Why isn't Joey McGuire on your Coach of the Year watch list? Why isn't Kalani Sitake on your Coach of the Year watch list? Well, Texas Tech is projected first. BYU is projected second, or 1B. That's why. And I'm not saying Joey McGuire or Kalani Sitake can't win the Coach of the Year award. Of course they can. They have the chops and the talent. But what's the expectation? Texas Tech is defending Big 12 champion and the consensus favorite. They enter the season ranked 12th in both AP and coaches polls, and BYU is 14th in one and 15th in the other. These teams are supposed to be good. So if Texas Tech wins 10, 11 games, awesome, great. Everyone expected you to do that, and you did it. Same thing with BYU. They win 9 or 10, 11. Again, great season, but nobody's shocked. That's what the expectation was. Coach of the year becomes really interesting when somebody takes the expectation and obliterates them. And that's what I'm looking for. So now we're going to keep moving down the list, right? Then there's Utah, average projection 3.8. And I'm going to make my prediction right now. I am not buying Utah at number 3. I'm not. And that's okay, right? This is what makes preseason football fun. No one has to agree on everything. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. But if I'm trying to identify the coach of the year winner before the season starts, Utah is not where I'm putting my money. So now we've eliminated or at least deprioritized the top 3. And that's when I think we hit what I think is the coach of the year sweet spot. So look at approximately 4 through 11. This is where I think the action is, right? These aren't necessarily bad football teams. Some of them could be very good. Most of them aren't entering the season with championship expectations. And I think that's important because there's room to overachieve. And then at the bottom, have another cutoff, right? Your Kansas, Cincinnati, Central Florida, Colorado, Iowa State. They sit 12 through 16. Could somebody surprise us out of this group? Sure. But my concern with that group is the opposite problem. Can they win enough games to actually have a coach of the year? Right? That's the difference between exceeding expectations and having genuinely great season. Right? Going from the bottom of the barrel to 11th isn't going to win you coach of the year. Right? You still have to win big time games. So I'm looking for that intersection, right? It's a team expected low enough that there's room for surprise, but talented enough to actually make the serious jump. And that's how I arrived at my watch list. And we'll go and focus that again. All right. The consensus has Houston at 4th. Now, Houston is a little different because expectations have already climbed for the Cougars this year. They went 10-3 last season, won the Texas Bowl, finished 22nd. They return quarterback Connor Wegman, plenty of talent, and Houston enters 2026 ranked 23rd in the AP poll. So Fritz doesn't have the enormous expectation gap that Rich Rod has. But I have him on the list because if Houston goes from being projected 4th to actually winning this conference, he's going to have a great case. And Fritz has the reputation of building programs. So if Houston takes another step, ends up in the college football playoff conversation, watch out for Willie Fritz. Next, we got Brent Brennan, Arizona. Average projection is 4.2. Now, they are kind of fascinating because they're close enough to the top that a championship is realistic, but they're not carrying the same expectations as Texas Tech or BYU. And the Big 12 beat writers actually have Arizona tied with Houston for 3rd, while the AP poll has Arizona outside the top 25. That's a nice coach of the year position, right? If Arizona finishes 4th, nobody cares. If they win the Big 12, completely different conversation now. So now Brennan is firmly on the list. Now we get into some names that are really maybe outliers, but have real potential. Eric Morris, Oklahoma State, right? The consensus finish is 9th. Right? This is a new era at Oklahoma State. There's real uncertainty about the program, but there's also upside, right? Morris came over after producing a high-powered offense at North Texas, and even current preseason betting analysis has Oklahoma State as an intriguing long shot Big 12 contender. So imagine OK State goes from projected 9th to 8-4, 9-3. And maybe they're hanging around the championship race in November. Eric Morris is suddenly one of the biggest stories in the conference. And we know he has a high-powered offense, a lot of talent coming with him from North Texas. So if he can put it all together, that certainly puts him in a good position to win this as a newcomer of the conference. Then we look at Dave Aranda. He's a bit of an outlier, right? The consensus pick for them is 11.2. But what if they win 8 or 9 games, right? What if Aranda gets Baylor back to the glory days when he had him winning the Big 12 conference, right? If they make that jump, which for the record, I don't think they would, but I'm just saying if he comes in and is able to make that jump again, right? That's the type of season that gets noticed, right? And I think Aranda has that same advantage that Rich Rod has. There's low expectations, but that can create an enormous upside. But it also creates enormous risk, right? You're picked 11th for a reason. And there's a reason that you're projected to be at the bottom. Either you didn't have a good year the year before, you lost a lot, or both. And so now we get to West Virginia. right? And we arrive at the guy that this entire exercise has been built around. Rich Rodriguez, consensus pick for the conference 11.4. And this is why the number matters. West Virginia doesn't have to win the Big 12 for Rich Rod to make a compelling case for coach of the year. We've already established, when we looked at Matt Campbell, his records were 8 wins, 9 wins. Right? The award has the precedent for recognizing the coaching job, not merely the wins and losses. So now imagine if West Virginia finishes 6th or 5th. Right? That's 5 positions above expectation. What if we win 8 games? What if we win 9 games? Now Rich Rod might be one of the favorites for this award because the story isn't Rich Rod won 9 games. The story is Rich Rod took a team expected to finish 11th in the Big 12 with only 5 wins and turned it into a top 5 team in the conference, right? That's different. That's a story that voters remember, voters can get behind. Now, I do have an honorable mention in Colin Klein at Kansas State. Now, the consensus pick for K-State is 6.6, so they're expected to be a solid team. But this is Klein's first season at Kansas State, right after Kleiman retired. Kansas State has Avery Johnson back, a quarterback, that's shown flashes of offensive talent, but maybe just hasn't been consistent. So think about this. First-year head coach, former Kansas State quarterback, returns home, immediately takes the Wildcats to a Big 12 championship game, or is in contention in late November. Right? Klein would absolutely be in this race. And that's kind of why I have him as an honorable mention. And let's just be clear. I'm not saying one of these guys has to win it. I'm saying that these are the coaches whose preseason position, to me, gives them the combination I'm looking for. Again, enough talent to win, but enough doubt that winning big would actually mean something, right? That's the difference. And now let's finish where we started. 11.4. Remember that number. Because right now that's kind of where the consensus West Virginia in 12. And nobody is expecting Rich Rodriguez to have the best team in this conference. Good, because maybe he doesn't need the best team. Maybe Rich needs the team that most dramatically exceeds expectations. So if West Virginia finishes 11th, right, the experts were right. If we finish 9th, okay, they were a little off, but you're looking at 5th, 6th, 4th. Now that preseason prediction becomes part of Rich Rodriguez's resume because every step that West Virginia climbs makes the story bigger. And if Rich Rod takes a team the consensus sees around 11th and has them competing near the top, he doesn't need 11 wins to be coach of the year, right? History says otherwise. And so in 2026, with the talent we have coming in, right? Hawkins Jr., Cam Cook, some of the guys on the perimeter, Rich Rod has one hell of an opportunity to shake things up in the Big 12 this year. And I think not if he does, when he does, he'll be standing at the end of the season holding the Big 12 Coach of the Year trophy. So that's my episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to like, share, and subscribe so all of Mountaineer Nation can join in. Always trust the beard. And remember, goodbye, God bless, go Ears.